Well, there are many ways of doing the role of opposition. There are many ways of going about doing party politics. What we are always very keen to do in the way that we do our politics is that we want to challenge ideologies, we want to challenge principles and policies. But what we've always done, and in fact I said so to your colleague Rosa Stenger when she interviewed me on my anniversary as 10 years leader of the GSLP, if somebody does attack us personally, we demonstrate that anybody who's going to try and bully us is going to get exactly the same thing back.
But surely what the opposition is saying, that you as Chief Minister listen to the group's concerns, and then the paper of the party which you lead insinuates that their motives are not altruistic and in quite inflammatory terms.
Well, of course you have, in the most basic understanding of our political system, a difference between a political party and a government that emerges from that political party. The government and the party are two separate entities. They must be. That is what is required constitutionally in the structure that we have. And the government pursues the policies of the party that elects it when it is in government, but it also has to make decisions and deal with things day to day, which are not reflected in conversations which may be had in the executive or indeed in the run-up to a general election when policies are made. The party continues to have an existence. And of course, what we've seen in the past is that the GSLP is the only real political party that has a life beyond the fact that it has a government or doesn't have a government, that it's in opposition or doesn't have an opposition. And the party has its own life, the government has its own life, we pursue the same policies, but we are not always doing exactly the same thing because the government has to make a decision on the spot without being able to go back to the executive committee. This is Politics 101. The GSD, I suppose, understand it. It's just not convenient for them to reflect it in the way that they've decided to attack the GSLP now.
But of course, one of the concerns is that the lines are not crossed, are not blurred, because the GSD says that a lot of the information in the New People is private government information.
Indeed, it would be crossing that line, and I can tell you that there has been no blurring or crossing of that line. I can tell you that the government is very careful with the way that it manages personal data and information of individuals. But look, you should also consider what happened. For example, the most high profile of these instances is the recent work done by The Guardian and other international press organizations to reveal what we now call the Panama Papers. Those are papers which are in the control of private law firms and accountancy firms, and also in the control of governments, and yet they make their way into a newspaper and in a number of newspapers around the world because that is in the public interest. The government of Gibraltar would never, and I'm now talking as Chief Minister, not as leader of the GSLP, disclose information or data that it holds on an individual to any newspaper or indeed to any press organization. Very often when we're asked by GBC questions which we consider reflect on an individual's data, we tell you that we're unable to give you that information even when the government needs to defend itself. So for example, if you highlight a particular case of a particular individual and we know from the data that we control that what you have been told may not be right, we are sometimes not able to correct the record because the data that we hold under certain rules about the management of that data as government. Now, the newspaper is something completely different. The newspaper, like every newspaper, seeks information. Some people are very careless in the way that they share information. Information is held not just by the government, but by many different entities. And when a newspaper obtains information, it publishes that information in the way that it considers appropriate.
Well, Chief Minister, I really have to ask, what level of editorial control do you exercise in the New People?
Not enough. And look, the shareholder is the leader of the GSLP as trustee for the executive committee and the members of the GSLP. But I'm the shareholder in that trusteeship capacity. The directors of the company are the editorial board of the New People, appointed by the executive committee of the GSLP from time to time. As everybody has known, since the GSLP created the New People on the 1st of May 1980, and indeed as members of the GSD often reflect when they are attacking us in Parliament and they refer to what the New People says, when it contradicts something that the government may have said, or when it is exactly the same as something that the government may have said. So, I have no editorial control. The editor is Antonio Roca, and he makes the final decisions about what goes into that newspaper or not.
On another point, on the point of declaring members' interests in Parliament, you say that in the interest of transparency, you chose to disclose the holding structure of the company to the Register of Ultimate Beneficial Ownership. Wouldn't it have been the right thing to do, to go the whole hog and declare the members' interests in Parliament, even if you weren't obliged to?
So I don't think there is any interest to declare. You have to understand that here what we are talking about is the fact that I hold these chairs on trust for the Gibraltar Socialist Labour Party executive and members. I am the leader of the Gibraltar Socialist Labour Party, and I am elected to the Parliament, and I am the leader of the House and Chief Minister because I am the leader of the Gibraltar Socialist Labour Party, and I put that by my name when I stand for election. So it is therefore absolutely clear, transparent, and it couldn't be more obvious to anyone that I am the leader of the Gibraltar Socialist Labour Party. Indeed, it is declared that they fund my election expenses. So this is really, in my view, the GSD trying to pretend that there is an issue of probity and propriety, as they always do, to try and tarnish me, as they tried to tarnish Joe Bassano, in those days using the Gibraltarian, subsequently using the 7 days. And the reality is that there is absolutely no breach of the rules, technical or otherwise whatsoever, that we perceive. We have wanted to be more transparent than we are required to be. So when the time came to have an ultimate beneficial ownership register, we wanted to have the disclosure of the ownership of the shares in Beckett and the New People Publishing Limited, so that people knew that nothing had changed, although there was a period when those shares were not held by the leader of the GSLP on behalf of the members of the GSLP, which was the awful period when the GSD were in power between 1996 and 2010, and the New People was censored, silenced, and excluded from GSLP, from GSD government press conferences, etc. And the shares were then held by Clive Galt on his personal account for him to be able to make a living, whilst the GSD disgracefully excluded him from everything in that period, that dark period of GSD censorship of the freedom of the press in Gibraltar.
Chief Minister, you're talking reality. Is the reality that meetings with this particular group may now be slightly more uncomfortable?
I don't think so. Look, I've said in Parliament very recently that if the trustees or this group wish to meet me, if they wish because they think that we can advance things in any way, or they could understand things in a different way, to meet me, that as Chief Minister, I'm giving you this interview as leader of the GSLP, that's why we're not in government offices, but as Chief Minister, I would of course make myself available to have further discussions with them if they thought it was necessary or appropriate. I meet Keith Asubali and Roy Clinton. Even though we might throw daggers at each other in public, we can continue to have a discussion and a disagreement in private as well, or seek areas of agreement, despite the fact that we may have set out from different originating public positions.